Funding for the Hinckley Report is made possible in part by the George S. and Dolores Doré Eccles Foundation and the Cleone Peterson Eccles Endowment Fund.
Tonight on the Hinckley Report, the legislative session passes the halfway mark and most bills have yet to be debated. How are legislators managing a historic number of budget requests? Will we see any major compromises? And how are citizens speaking out? At the federal level, debate over President Trump's national emergency at the southern border remains contentious. How have Utah's leaders responded? How will the courts weigh in? And what other issues will our members of Congress tackle that could affect our state? Good evening and welcome to the Hinckley Report. I'm Jason Perry, director of the Hinckley Institute of Politics. Covering the week, we have Bethany Rogers, political reporter for the Salt Lake Tribune, Max Roth, political reporter and anchor for Fox 13 News, and Spencer Stokes, president of Stokes Strategies. Thank you all for joining us. Such an interesting time when our legislature is going strong, and we're going to jump right into what's happening just today. Spencer, you first. All right, a couple of big things. One, we get the revenue numbers today, so we know what our legislature is really dealing with. And number two, our tax bills coming out today. Let's start with the revenue numbers and what's happening.
So I think the legislature has kind of a preview, and it's not as rosy as they thought, but it's Utah. So it's still rosy, comparing other states. So, but they won't be as high as they thought they would be, is what we're hearing.
So it was going to be, they thought 1.3 billion, right?
Yes,
and it's
correct.
Going to be, they think maybe just under $1 billion?
Right.
That,
so, but like I said, not quite as rosy. But the sales tax bill, which is coming out soon. We don't really know. There were caucus presentations yesterday, but that is a massive change in tax policy in the state. A lot of people have exemptions. They're trying to broaden the base and lower the rate, which is a positive thing for the state. It's the right thing to do. But I think there's going to be a lot of things they haven't thought about yet. We were talking a little bit earlier about you purchase a car for $40,000. You still have $10,000 worth of value left in it. You go to a trade-in. You used to pay taxes on the minus the $10,000, $30,000. But now what's going to happen is you'll pay the sales tax on the full value. You won't get the trade-in. But when the trade-in's sold again, it's going to be taxed. So there's some double taxation things they're going to need to work through with that. And the legislature does a pretty good job hearing those messages and dealing with them.
Max, let's talk about these exemptions, because there's 88 sales tax exemptions. They're going after 16 of them, at least right now, and hopefully we'll see this bill today. They could still be debating this. Talk about the implications of those exemptions going forward, and if you're getting rid of some of those, the costs just are shifting in other places even more than we may have expected.
Yeah, it does start shifting, and they're talking about taxing services a lot more. I think the most interesting thing about this is that the governor set a goal which clearly the legislators who are running the tax bills don't believe is possible. And so immediately you do have this executive and legislative clash where he wanted a 1.75% state sales tax, and the legislature is just saying, that's impossible. We'll try and lower it, but we're not going to get there.
Yes, Beth, let's talk about these kind of services that are going to start being kind of assessed a tax. What are some of those that you're hearing on the Hill, the ones people are most concerned about? Talk about the implications.
Sure. So some of the services include professional services. I think that's the broadest category that's being talked about right now. That would include even legal services and things like that. Those could have strong pushback. There are a lot of lobbyists representing these different interests that are on the Hill that might object to the expansion of taxation to their industry. But earlier this week, I heard from Senator Fillmore, who's been involved in designing this bill, who said that it's really important to have buy-in and contributions from all areas of the economy so that nobody says that, I'm too special to pay taxes now.
But Max, a lot of people are saying that, right? So the idea is we lower the rate, we broaden the base, but when you're broadening the base, a lot of these special areas.
And these are
really...
not, when you're talking about lawyers and real estate brokers and those sorts of things, you're talking about clout. When you're talking on Capitol Hill about taxing these groups, I mean, these are not people who are going to be pushed over. In fact, I for a while I thought it was a law that the Senate president had to be involved in real estate to some degree or other. So,
but let's not forget that no lawyer is going to be paying this tax. This sales tax is going to be pushed to the consumer, and so still citizens of Utah will be paying this tax, not just accountants or lawyers or real estate, or they're all going to be passed along to the consumer, 100% of them.
Although the vast majority of people, I would imagine, who are watching us right now have not paid a lawyer in the last year or the last 5 years.
Right.
I haven't. Most of us go through most of our lives not using these services. So I would imagine that these are services that tend to fall to people who either can afford them more than
well, and
more than most
corporations will be paying. If you're selling a business or merging a business or doing a transaction, those companies are going to be paying that new sales tax.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, corporations don't pay tax. We do, right? So it all gets passed along.
Right.
So maybe Bethany, just one more piece on this, because it's things that maybe we're not hiring lawyers, but things like software, for example, or the haircuts, or
even Uber rides.
Or Uber rides.
Yeah, stuff like that. And I think another important thing to note about this is that while the whole point is to broaden the base, lower the rate now so people aren't paying overall more in sales tax at this point, it's to put the sales tax on a trajectory so that over time it does grow. So 5-10 years down the road, the amount of revenue might be bigger tomorrow than it would have been had these reforms not taken place.
And this dramatic transformation of the overall economy is really what this is about, isn't it? Because it's a service economy. The retail chains are closing, retail stores are closing. We don't tend to pay at local stores as much as we used to. We pay for services. That's just, it's the way
it's an important policy to tackle. It is going to be difficult as they're tackling it, but it's an important policy to tackle for the future because, as you said, we have a shifting economy. And in order for the government to continue to run and provide the services that we have become used to, it has to happen.
Okay, before we leave it, Spencer, because I know a lot of these legislators talk to you about these things, tell us, how much are they going to be able to really get to this session? Give us your crystal ball on this.
Well, as with any large policy that goes to the legislature does a pretty good job, the leadership, of kind of hunkering down and getting the caucus to participate and go along with them. And I think you're going to see that same thing this year. Okay. I think they will get something done. I think they'll get the majority of what they'd like to get done because it's going to be, we're hunkering down on this and we're doing it because it has to be done. You saw that early on in the session with Medicaid expansion. They hunkered down on that and did what they said they were going to do, and they didn't worry too much about what was being chirped at them out in the halls.
One of the things that are being chirped about is tied to money. It comes down to education funding. So Max, let's take a second on this. So the legislature has a plan right now, a 4% increase, about $128 million. It depends on the money they find. It's probably still not going to move us out of last place in terms of
no, I think we're still chasing Idaho for that last place spot.
Correct.
I mean, it's we have the last place spot, pride of place, and it's certain. By the way, I want to get past this idea of chirping, because I think talking about healthcare and education, it's not chirping when you're asking for things that are that significant. These are people who are talking about really genuinely important things to them. Education, I mean, Utah is. You would have to increase funding far more than they're talking about.
The only way you're going to fix that balance is going to happen at home, not at the state legislature. If you're going to move out of last place, we've got to stop having as many kids as we have. But let's keep in mind, we always talk about the legislature increasing funding. Let's keep in mind that the income tax is dedicated to education, so they don't really have a choice in this. They do shift every once in a while, but income tax is dedicated to public education, and they've done some shifting into higher education. But you can hold them out as heroes, but it's really that fund that's doing it.
Okay. Let's switch gears to a couple other bills I'd like to get to that are really being at the forefront this week. Bethany, let's talk about this hate crimes legislation. All right. As we started the week, our representative in the legislature said, I give this a 50-50 chance to get through committee. Unanimous, though. Okay, talk about what happened there and kind of where we see this hate crimes legislation going forward.
So last week there was some concern that this bill wouldn't even get a committee hearing at all. We were hearing that the Republican caucus in the Senate was divided on this, and until there was a majority support or some sort of tipping point of support, it wasn't going to get scheduled. Then we heard from Senator Thatcher that he begged and pleaded. Something happened behind closed doors, and it got its hearing. As you mentioned, it got unanimous support in committee. But what I think is important is that he predicted it will be a lot tighter on the floor, and just because fellow Republicans were willing to give it a hearing doesn't necessarily mean that's going to translate into votes.
It's true. Let me give you a quote from Senator Thatcher going into this committee hearing, and Max, maybe you give us a comment about it. He said that some people fundamentally have an issue with treating crimes differently. The reason that I struggle with that point of view is literally every single crime is different. He's trying to really get to this argument that Bethany was talking about with the Republicans. Please unpack that a little bit.
Well, I mean, he's absolutely true that is the philosophical distinction that some make, where they're saying, well, why would an assault because someone's angry at me or just because they don't like the way I looked at them be different than someone assaulting me because I'm homosexual or I'm a member of another race or something like that. Now the argument on the other side of that is simply this, that if you're committing a crime against someone because of the category of person they are, that's a crime against an entire category, and it's a crime that instills fear in a community that's not instilled if you get in a bar fight. And so, there is a philosophical distinction there, but most of this committee sided with Thatcher.
And I just want to jump in on that. Over last weekend, there was a tweet that went viral showing a video of a man on the street in Salt Lake City, asking someone who was recording him with a cell phone camera if they were gay, and then when the person said yes, punching them or striking out at them. And I spoke with Troy Williams, Executive Director of Equality Utah, about the hate crimes bill, and he brought that example up. He said that if you're watching that video as a gay person, it looks like a first-person perspective. It looks like you're the one being hit. So in that way, he said it strikes fear into the heart of Utahns who are LGBT who are watching that video.
Spencer, is this the kind of thing that is changing the dialogue, these kinds of videos, us being able to kind of see more firsthand?
Look, I'm supportive of Senator Thatcher's bill. I think it's the right thing to do. We have an interesting thing in Utah. We're either first or we're last at passing these kinds of things. And this is something that needs to be done. We saw this play out in Chicago. I think the police chief in Chicago, the superintendent, really made a big, bold statement about this, and it cuts both ways. It does cut both ways.
You're talking about Jesse Smollett.
Yeah, exactly. And but it needs to be done because, as Max and Brittany have said, this strikes out at a complete group of people, and we should not be doing that. We should not be striking fear into the hearts of any society, any group of people.
That's right. I'm going to go through a couple others that are kind of really interesting this week too. Let's talk about straight party voting. Max, this is so interesting going forward because it's not just a Democrat proposing this, right? But we have Representative Patrice Aaron, but we also have Senator Kurt Bramble, a Republican, saying get rid of straight party voting.
There's some interesting implications to this, I think. I mean, because you look at the way that a Utah ballot goes, and I think the most instructive thing from the 2018 voting was how easily candidates won in most races except McAdams Love in the major races we were watching. And then what happened when you got to those ballot propositions, and all of a sudden, there's no party listed on there, and everybody has to make an individual decision there, and it doesn't say R&D, and suddenly you've got these 50-50 splits that don't happen in other races in Utah. And so it's that's a big implication. That is one party giving up power, and if the legislature does that, that's what would surprise me. Is if the legislature does that, that would be the Republican Party giving up power.
And look, we've entered into a new day and age. The parties were easily defined a number of years ago. That's not the case anymore. So whether you're a Republican or Democrat, there is now a spectrum of what kind of Republican are you, what kind of Democrat are you. And it's time that people, figure out who they're going to vote for individually and not hide behind one or the other. But there is a confusion, because if you vote straight party Republican, somebody may not choose to do that because they want to go vote for Ben McAdams. But what happens in the law is that your individual vote for a person trumps the straight party. So it counts Ben McAdams, even though he was a Democrat, but then counts the rest of the Republicans that you may have voted for if you voted straight party. And there is confusion by that. Some people walk in there because we have now in the primaries, you have to be either Republican or Democrat to vote in the primary. Well, Republican for sure. And you have to ask for that ballot. And that's gotten, I think, into the minds of people. And so they think when they go in, I've got to declare what I am. And they don't necessarily think I'm voting for all Republicans when I hit that Republican or Democrat.
Interesting. In Salt Lake County alone, 127,000 people did that in the last election, just straight party. So it's certainly an issue.
And it does cut both ways, depending on where you live in the county.
So it does. Bethany, let's take a moment, because you've done some great reporting on a bill that has caught a lot of attention on conversion therapy.
Yeah.
Maybe describe what that is and a little bit about the path this lets now and where it's going.
Conversion therapy is a pretty broad term, but generally it refers to therapeutic practices that try to change someone's sexual orientation or gender identity. This is a broadly, most medical and psychiatric organizations now denounce this practice as being harmful, potentially leading people further into depression and sort of self-hatred. So a number of states have moved forward with conversion therapy bans when it comes to minors. And this is what is on the table here in Utah. It's been defined very carefully to apply only to state licensed therapists, so it would not apply to people like life coaches or clergy. And because that's the way it's worded, the bill's sponsors believe that it kind of avoids the First Amendment problems that have been raised.
Very interesting. Max, it's interesting to see an issue like this get such attention from our legislature.
It is, and at the same time, anyone who's grown up in Utah and who has known gay people as they've grown up in Utah knows that that conversion therapy, if you're as old as I am, probably Gen X or older is probably not as common among millennials, but that this was a common part of life for any person of the LDS faith who has same-sex attraction would have been placed in these programs that were very prevalent for a long time. And so I think our legislators probably have that same experience of seeing people go through this and talking to them, and so they probably do have some sympathy, some empathy for what that does.
But it's interesting. I think I can say this because I am a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, to use their moniker. You can't give a clergy exemption and then have the LDS Church come running out and saying we're supportive of this. Should this apply across the board? It's been very, very narrowly defined to get the support. And like I said, we're either first or we're last in most issues in the state. And so I'd like to see it go a little broader and remove some of those exemptions, but definitely for minors, it absolutely should happen. If an adult wants to do that, the conversion therapy, I think a lot of Republicans on the Hill think that this should apply to Democrats. They're trying to convert Democrats over to Republican Party. But so it'll be great to see it pass, and I think it will pass because it's so narrowly defined.
Okay. Max?
Yeah.
Are we going to have horse racing in the state of Utah?
Ooh. Now, here's the thing. Honestly, I need to study this bill more because we already, in the Weber County Fairgrounds with former commissioner here, they have, they race with the little chariots and everything, right, up there?
They do.
Can't bet on it.
Can't bet on it.
Yeah.
Right.
So, but if you bet on it, Utah doesn't allow any betting of any kind.
This was tried before. Parimutuel betting was put on the ballot back in the 90s, and I was a commissioner. I was asked about my opinion, and come to find out, apparently I was on the same side as the Supreme Court. It isn't a game of chance. If you know what you're betting on in a horse race, you know the lineage, you know all the rest of their races they've run, you know who's their handlers
You've
are.
got the Spencer Stokes system down.
Yeah,
well,
you've got
that. It's a science. So,
yes,
and therefore not a game of chance.
And the Supreme Court in Utah ruled it that way until the legislature came back a couple years later and said we're not going to allow pari-mutuel betting. I don't think it's a problem in this state, but there are those that say if you open up gambling of any measure in the state, then gambling can be of all types can be allowed on reservations.
And is there a number we can call to get your lock solid pick?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, give me a
sure
call.
thing from Spencer Stokes. Okay, I want to talk about some things happening in the federal government for just a moment as well. Chris Stewart started something interesting, and it's sort of a theme that's bubbling up around the country. But in Utah, he started the Anti-Socialism Caucus. All right, so Spencer, is this a thing now?
Apparently you can go join it. Look, this is something that is being overplayed for political purposes in my mind, but yes, that is a thing.
Okay, well, so let's talk about it a minute to see if it's being overplayed. And Bethany, I want to show something from the governor's State of the State, which is it's just a little couple lines that I thought were interesting about this very issue. The governor said, "Frankly, I have been disturbed by some of the rising generation's fascination with socialism. It is imperative that Utah's high school graduates understand the basic economic principles of free market capitalism that have made America great." So it's interesting in the State of the State, but this is something we're seeing from a lot of folks that maybe kids today, for maybe talk about the reasons why.
I think we're all looking to Bethany because I think you're the millennial in the crew.
Well, I do think you can look at someone like Representative Ocasio-Cortez, and she identifies as a democratic socialist, and I think that socialism among maybe the younger generation is no longer a dirty word. I saw some reporting that that an older generation is much more uncomfortable even with the term than people now. So I think that, it's something that people are comfortable saying. It's not a bad label necessarily among younger people.
Well, what do you think, Max? Is that why these people are bringing it up? Are young people forgetting what that means? Or?
I think it's a handy buzzword on the political right. It's a dog whistle to say, we're not them. Because honestly, you look back at our history. I mean, under Dwight Eisenhower, we had tax rates at the high end that were at 90%. Under Richard Nixon, he was pushing for medical coverage programs that were more liberal than Obamacare. George Romney was a very activist housing and urban development secretary, and so this idea that talking about expanding Medicaid or Medicare is taking us towards the USSR is
it is all about a new generation, a new economy, our economy looks much different. I mean, my father would have no idea about this service economy we now live in. He would probably embrace someone picking up a meal and bringing it to him, but this is a different economy, and we are going to have to view the economy differently. There are people who are talking about many things will be happening by automation and robotics in the future. How will the tax revenues be generated when that's not a human doing that job, and thus you're not taxing them through income tax? And so how will that be dealt with? So there is a shifting ideal, if you will, and it probably isn't called socialism, and it could probably be called something different, but the economy is changing that, and I think younger people are embracing how that economy will look in the future.
Max, I'm curious about how these young folks are looking at this, particularly when you put the lens on of this national emergency that's been declared, right? So our young people are taking a particular view on this national emergency. Give us sort of an update on where that is and what people you are interviewing are saying about that declaration itself and where that puts us in Congress now.
Well, the young person that I interviewed about this yesterday was Mitt Romney. So he
does look younger than his age.
Oh,
yes.
gosh, did he make a deal with the devil? Or
I think he may have.
Guy is, it's unfair. Anyway, no, I did ask him about the emergency declaration, and he said he's completely open to voting against it. He's not sure about the constitutionality of it at this point. This is, it's extraordinary that what was passed that Congress considered for a long time an issue, and then they passed a bill about that issue, and then the president signed that bill, and then he made a declaration saying that bill creates an emergency because it didn't give him enough money for his barrier. And I don't know how you define an emergency if that is one.
Look, there are aspects of this public policy that I absolutely think are emergencies. The building of the wall is not the part that I think is an emergency. How we're dealing with legal immigration is an emergency. How we're dealing with the courts that handle the immigration is an emergency. How we're dealing with the population that's waiting at the border to come in, that's an emergency. So there may be things in this public policy discussion that are emergencies, but the wall as a whole is not the emergency part of it.
You would not have advised to start with that.
That would not have been my advice. Yeah.
Okay. And Max, anything else you gleaned from Mitt Romney about sort of what he's seeing as the dysfunction in Washington, D.C.?
First of all, he said that it was a bad deal, the government shutdown, that it did not accomplish anything. And he also said with the Mueller report possibly coming out in the next week or two, that he said his inclination is to think that there's probably, in his words, no there there when it comes to anything implicating the president in collusion.
However, Donald Trump wrote a book called The Art of the Deal. I think the new book should probably be called The Art of the Surreal, because every day is a new surrealism coming out of Washington.
Okay, very good. Thank you for your insights today. So very helpful. The Hinckley Report is now available as a podcast. If you would like to listen to the show, go to kued.org/Hinckley Report and find out how to subscribe. Thank you for being with us. Good night.